So let me just welcome everybody as we are looking at people introducing yourself. Okay, good morning. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the 9th annual SLO Symposium. My name is Jarek Janiu. I'm the Outcomes Coordinator from Santa Ana College in Southern California. This is symposium number 9. So we've been doing this for about, for 9 years now. I'm just so very happy to welcome you. I'm delighted to see the huge response that the symposium has received. The event has been sold out as it always has in the last few years. So thank you very much for being here, for your support. Thank you for your attendance. And we have, I hope, a fantastic event for you. We are going to meet in the course of 2 days, today and tomorrow. This morning, we are going to have a lineup of breakout sessions, panel discussion, and last but not least, our keynote that's going to start momentarily. This year's symposium, Competency and Equitable Learning, I suppose the title really reflects our changing and ever evolving, ever developing understanding of what it means to pay attention to student learning, what it means to measure it, and what it means to actually deliver and empower our students. So I think that with these thoughts in mind, this is where our discussions are heading. And many of you who've been attending our Friday SLO talks know that the question of equity has been permeating pretty much all our discussions, from assessment to classroom instruction to really school institutional management. So we are at it together. We have built a very, very strong community. It's really a collective effort. And again, I'm just so very grateful for all the support I have received over the years. With that, I'm going to introduce our guest speakers here. First, I would like to introduce Cheryl Aschenbach. I'm just so very grateful for Academic Senate support. This is California, Academic Senate for California Community Colleges. Cheryl Aschenbach, if you could please welcome the crowd. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Jarek, and good morning, everybody. On behalf of the Academic Senate, I'm so excited to invite you into this space for 2 days of in-depth conversation and practice sharing and trouble shooting with like-minded colleagues from across the nation, which is really exciting that this effort of Jarek's, and I have to give a ton of credit. This is our 9th annual symposium, and this is Jarek's vision and Jarek's passion, and the team of folks that he's assembled to help bring this to you all deserve tremendous thank yous. It's no easy feat, but happy to be a part of this as the Academic Senate representative, and look forward to seeing you through some of the sessions. Welcome and enjoy, and Jarek and team, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. On behalf of Research and Planning Group, Aaron Zetner is here to say hello. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all today. And I wanted to say thank you so much for coming out. These next 2 days are going to be exciting. I've been attending this event for the last 8 years. And what I see is there's continued collaboration, learning, and sharing of ideas. And we're really looking to continue to build our community of practice, as Jarek had alluded to, around teaching and learning excellence. We have an amazing lineup of presentations today. Many of our friends and colleagues from everywhere are coming to share and build, like I said, the infrastructure of insight for everyone. And so, like I said, thank you all for coming out today. On behalf of all my friends and colleagues in the areas of not just research, but peers and faculty, we hope everybody has a great conference today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning. And now I would like to express my sincere thanks and really tons of appreciation towards Fresno City College, who is hosting the event. Susie Nitzel is there. You don't really hear from her, but I tell you, she's making all the Zoom work possible. So I'm just so very grateful. And here's Enrique Hauriki, who is going to speak about how Fresno City College is supporting the event. So please, Enrique, say a few words.
On behalf of Fresno City College, I wish you a meaningful SLO Symposium. This all become possible thanks to the support received from Jarek Janiu, especially Susie Nitzel, and all the presenters and moderators. Now it is with great honor that I introduce to you Don Lopez, our Vice President of Instruction. Thanks for your great support, Don.
Thank you, Enrique. So as Enrique said, my name is Don Lopez, and I'm the Vice President of Instruction here at Fresno City College. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. And I want to say thank you to Yark as well. This has been really a great relationship that we've built. This is the second time that Fresno City College is acting as a facilitator for the symposium. And I've been so impressed by the efforts of the SLO Symposium, and wanted to applaud the members and all of the people that are participating today in the various workshops. You know, I understand the importance of the work that you're doing, and I fully support the work that we do here at Fresno City College to develop some meaningful, do the good work that you have. This year's symposium provides you with solutions for your student learning assessments. Thank you, and enjoy your conference.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir, for the remarks. Indeed, wouldn't have happened without Fresno City College. So we're just extremely grateful. And now let's move on to our program. Here's before I start even talking about this, I would like to express my thanks to my colleagues, the outcomes coordinators from throughout the state of California, who've been so very helpful, always ready to share their expertise. Also, I would like to thank all the sponsors that we have for the event, from Academic Senate for California Community Colleges. We've been supported by the Chancellor's Office for California Community Colleges, Harvard University, Fresno City College, Santa Ana College, Western Governors National, Lewis University, California State, University of Long Beach, and Research and Planning Group. So thank you very much. Welcome. And now we are going to have Amanda Tainter, Outcomes Coordinator from Reedley College, to introduce our keynote. Welcome, everyone. Let's go.
See, I think Leanne was going to introduce herself first as a fellow coordinator, and then I'll go after her.
You know what? She is. I think
I made it, Yarek. I made it.
You're there.
Yes. I know. Thank you,
Leanne.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 9th Annual Symposium. I will be co-moderating with Amanda, and we're so excited for this keynote speaker.
Welcome, everyone. I am Amanda Tainter. I'm the faculty coordinator of Instructional Design, Distance Education, and Outcomes at Reedley College. I will be monitoring the chat with Leanne to take questions or suggestions, and I am honored to introduce our keynote presentation, Assessment for, Not of Learning, by Dr. Eric Mazur, Professor of Physics and Applied Physics at Harvard University.
I forgot that I'd muted myself. Thank you so much for introducing me, and thank you so much for having me above all. I love the title of your symposium. It's something that is so dear to my heart, and something I think that has been neglected for way too long. I want to start today's talk with a little anecdote, something that happened to me a number of years ago. I don't remember exactly when. I was boarding a plane in Newark, something I did quite often before the pandemic. I haven't left this chair in almost 2 years now. And I'd love to visit you all at some point in the future. But I was boarding a flight in Newark to go to give a series of talks in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And as I sat down in my seat, I found myself next to a young woman. We started chatting, and she told me that she had just graduated from the University of Chicago, and that she was working for an ed tech company. And since I have been active in the ed tech sector too, I thought I better find out what she does. Well, it turns out her company was taking flashcards, those cards that have questions on one side and answers on the other, and transferring them to smartphones. Now, those of you who are familiar with my background know that I don't place very high value on memorization. More about that later this morning. And so I had to actually, suppress a tendency of, rolling my eyes. But I managed to do that, and it so happened that earlier that week I had attended a talk at Harvard by Reddy Ratinger on memorization. And Reddy Ratinger, I don't know if you're familiar with his work, published a paper back, I think it was around 2010 or so, on how much and how long students retain information from studying with flashcards. And his work shows that if you study with flashcards and then wait a time and test students, you find that the amount of information that is retained varies greatly with the duration between the testing and the studying. He also shows that the testing itself reinforces the memory, but that's a whole separate point. What I want you to remember is this. His study shows that if you have people study with flashcard and you test them in the next 3 days, they remember a fair amount. If, however, you wait 3 days, that drops precipitously, and after 1 week, only 35% is retained. Now, I thought that since she was, working for a company that took flashcards and put them on smartphones, she should know this. So I grabbed my iPad out of my briefcase and pulled up the article that has the graph that shows, 85% retained within the first 3 days, and then, something like 60% after the end of 3 days and 35% after 1 week. So I gave her my iPad, and she took my iPad, and she looked at it for no more than 30 seconds and handed it back to me. And she looked me straight in the eyes and she said, "But we only guarantee that they will pass the test." I never thought about it this way. And suddenly it brought back all kinds of memories. My daughter, my eldest daughter, just before this whole anecdote happened, was actually a student at Harvard. She was a bio major there. And when she got admitted to Harvard, I thought, this is fantastic, not only because of being admitted to Harvard, but more importantly, I'd have her close to me, I could give her advice. We'd often talk about education. And the word flashcard absolutely never came up in our vocabulary. But I remember driving to campus, and she had spent the weekend with us here. So I was driving with her in the passenger seat back to campus. I looked over my shoulder, and there she was using flashcards. So I said, "Natalie, what are you doing with flashcards?" And she said, "Well, I have to know all these amino acids for an upcoming midterm exam." I said, "I have an app for that. I actually, part of my work is in biophotonics, and occasionally I need to know something about the amino acids, but I don't use them often enough for them to stick in my mind. So I basically refer to this app." And she looked at me and she said, "Dad, we're not allowed to use the iPhone during an exam," which made me realize that students' study habits, even if they have the best of intentions in terms of learning, are completely dictated by our assessment practices. And therefore, unless we change our assessment practices, it's going to be very difficult to have an impact on education. Now, for close to 20 years, I've been bashing the lecture as an outmoded way of educating, because lectures focus on just the transfer of information. Today, I'm going to argue that a lot of the assessment practices, all the way from K through 12 to, higher ed, is equally ineffective because much of it is focused on the regurgitation of memorized information, or what I would call cookbook procedures. And consequently, instead of developing 21st century skills, assessment is essentially focusing on classifying and ranking people. And I would argue that our ability to actually classify and rank people is extremely limited. In other words, the people that we put at the top of our list in our own classes or maybe in our own departments are not necessarily the ones who are going to excel in society. And consequently, it's, so basically what I would like to do in the next hour, and then have a healthy discussion of about half an hour, is to discuss the what and the how and the when of assessment. More specifically, I want to start by discussing the purpose of assessment and get some of your input in that. Discuss some, and this will be the bulk of my talk probably, some of what I consider the most pressing problems in assessment. And I want to, because I'm an optimist, I don't want to end on a negative note here. I want to leave you with some concrete, suggestions for improvement. So let's start with the purposes of assessment. Please click on the little chat button there. I see that some people already started typing into it. I have it closed because I don't want to be distracted. So thank you to the two moderators for keeping an eye on the chat for me. I will open it now, and please put in as many different purposes of assessment you can think of. Why is it that you are assessing students in your course? Or maybe more generally, why is it that we're assessing people? And just type it in. To check for understanding, says Amy, to see if instruction is. Oh, good, this goes too fast for me. Good. So let me try to read here. Student learning outcomes, very good. Improve learning, to identify learning, self-evaluation, help reflect on teaching, determining if a student can move to the next course in a major, accreditation, measure skills, student feedback, very good, transparency of purpose and results. You seem to be ahead of most of the audiences I speak to, which is very good. I love preaching to the choir. So we'll have a very healthy discussion here. A window to see what you've taught well, says Lene. I'm scrolling back and forth here. Transparency and purpose of results, says Fiona. Clarify learning. Clarify learning, I really like that, because often, and perhaps more generally, assessment should be part of learning, even though it's not often seen that way. Manuel Alejandro says to see if they learned, if they understood, if they're creative and reflective, and also to reward them. To help students develop awareness of what's expected and how to achieve them. And in language, thank you, Patricia, for pointing out that there's, a whole part of the curriculum that's based on skills such as communication skills, to see that students can communicate with one another more with what is being learned. Okay, understanding process. Great. The one word that is missing, which I always see, right at the top in many of the audiences, is ranking. So I'm happy to see that missing. Annette says funding. Sadly, much of our funding is based on assessment. The more students who pass, the more money we receive. And it's very sad. I agree with you, Annette. And, I really think that if assessment is seen as a filter, who passes and who doesn't pass, then that affects all of education. Education should really not be a filter. It should not be a pipeline where many people enter and some people exit. It should be a way of lifting everybody. And I think if it's a filter, then the danger is that the filter is not well designed and that we go completely against the purpose up there, not an equitable education, that we reject many people who might be extremely capable of doing well in society, and we reject them for all the wrong reasons. So thank you for raising that right here at the beginning of my talk. Ranking has no place, exactly. Unfortunately, I mean, think about SATs, think about all kinds of federally or sort of state mandated testing. They're all based on numerical scales that actually end up ranking people. Fantastic. And yes, Leanne, I totally agree with you. It's really great to see a focus on formative assessment. And I hope that at the end of my talk, we can maybe start a discussion about some of the changes I've made in my course right now, which are not yet in this talk because I've only recently begun implementing it, and I'm not ready yet to talk about it more generally, but I'm happy to discuss that later. Okay, so let's look at the list that I've collected. And I think we've heard almost everything that is on that list. I've collected sort of, you know, by having this talk for many different audiences. One, to rate students. Who is the best student in the class? To rate the professor in the class, because in a sense, the assessment, as some of you pointed out, reflects back on us. One argument that I hear a lot is to motivate students to keep up with the work. If we wouldn't assess them, they wouldn't learn. I mean, think about small children, right? Pre-kindergarten and kindergarten, they're sponges. They're learning more than at any other part of their future lives. They're learning without assessment. They're learning because of an intrinsic desire to learn, because we are wired biologically to learn. So to say that without assessment, people wouldn't be motivated to learning is really not understanding how learning works. To provide feedback on learning to students, to tell them, you got this, you didn't get this, you may want to look a little bit more at that, which is part of also formative assessment. To provide feedback to the instructor. Oh my, I must have completely done poorly in this part because the students can't do this. To provide instructional accountability for accreditation, for part of the curriculum, and so on. And also to improve teaching and learning. I mean, I think we heard many of these different types of reasons for assessment in the feedback that was given. I'm going to close the chat again because I find it very distracting to read and talk at the same time. So if you type something else, I will not see it, but luckily the moderators can stop me if I need to pay attention to something. Now look at that list on the screen, and already you sort of see conflict there, because a lot of these reasons are not helping each other. They might actually clash, and it's clear that there's also no single educational activity that will be able to accomplish all of these goals. So we see right here already a problem. Pardon me here. So let's dive a little bit more deeply, because I think the problems go much more deeply than just this sort of fuzzy nature of assessment. I already made the case that most common assessment that is practiced around the world is aimed at grading knowledge, and much of it is factual. But even many assessments, like for example, asking what is the meaning or definition of blah 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 and so on. But I would argue that many assessments that claim to actually test problem-solving skills, if I go to my colleagues at Harvard, many of whom have not really thought very deeply about education, and I asked them, what are you really, and I asked this to my colleagues in the sciences, what are you trying to teach your students? Many of them will say, well, an important part is to teach them problem-solving skills. And I would argue that what they do is not actually teaching problem-solving skills. They teach and test inauthentic problem-solving skills. Let me explain what I mean by this. What is a real problem? If you have a real problem, whatever problem it is, a problem in a field or a problem in daily life, you generally know exactly what the desired outcome is. You're a doctor in an emergency room. A patient is brought in on a stretcher. You see at once that this patient is in bad shape. I mean, the desired outcome is very clear: to get this patient out of the emergency room alive. And the question is not what is the outcome. The question is, how do I get to this known outcome? What is the procedures? What do I need to do in order to go from a problem to a known outcome? And often the path to that known outcome is unknown when you face the problem. It's true in business, it's true in, it's true in daily life. You have guests coming over for dinner and you're baking a cake and suddenly you realize, oh my God, I don't have enough flour in the house. You know exactly what the desired outcome is: a cake that's ready in time for your guest. The question is, how are you going to get to the store, get the flour, come back home, bake the cake before the guests arrive? You get the picture. In general, in a real life problem, the outcome is known. The path to that outcome is unknown. In general, and I would argue the humanities are probably way ahead of where we are in the sciences. The type of problems that we test our students with follow a very different pattern. The students are given a problem, and I would say most textbook problems in the sciences, and in some of the social sciences perhaps too, the more quantitative ones, follow a different pattern from the one shown at the top of the screen. Students are given a problem, and in that problem, they're asked to apply a known procedure to find an unknown answer. Let me give you an example from my own field. A car is traveling around on a road with a velocity of so many miles per hour, and then, blah, 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 different things happened. And then at the end of the problem statement, the car hits a tree. And then that statement is followed with the question, what was the velocity of the car just before it hits the tree? So now the student has to think, what are the methods I have learned or memorized to calculate a velocity? Oh, there's this equation that I remembered. Oh, but I can't use that equation because I don't know all the variables. Oh, but I also know this equation. And all of a sudden you say, yeah, I can take the numbers that are given in the problem, put them in the equation, turn the crank, and out comes the answer, 4.2 meters per second. And you're evaluated not on how you obtain your answer, you're obtained on giving the correct answer. Now, I hope you see the difference between what's at the top and what's at the bottom. And I say that this is particularly important in the current day and age, because just as assembly line jobs, I don't know, where is my, okay, no, I'm going to give it, before I get to the job market, let me actually put this in a better context. So let me make that difference between a real problem and a textbook problem. And you'll understand why I make that, because the assessment is going to be very different. And put that in the context of Bloom's taxonomy. Benjamin Bloom, for those of you who are not familiar with him, was a psychologist in the 50s who came up with a a taxonomy. This is a slightly newer version of his taxonomy. And, you might debate the merits of this taxonomy, but I think it's a good framework to keep in mind when you think about assessment. From lower order thinking skills at the bottom to higher order thinking skills at the top. I was really happy to see some people mention already creativity and innovation in the chat earlier on. So at the bottom is remembering facts. The sky is blue. World War II ended in 1945 in some parts of the world. Newton's law is second law is F equals ma, and so on. The second level is understanding, knowing how different facts are related. The fact that an apple falls from the tree and that the moon orbits around the earth are related. Above that, we get applying, taking something you've learned in one context and applying that to a different context. Next comes analyzing, realizing what kind of knowledge you need in order to solve a certain problem. I would say we definitely don't get there in most of higher education, not even my institution, in part because we've siloed knowledge. And students know that if they're in a physics course, they use their physics knowledge to solve the problem, not chemistry or biology or humanities or whatever. Next is evaluating. How valid is my approach? And is the solution that I obtained reasonable? And all the way at the top is, I think, that elusive goal that we set for all of us, creativity or innovation. How do we extend the current knowledge that currently as humanity we have? I mean, that's where we want to get our students. But I would argue that even at an institution like mine, we don't even get to the third level applying. Let me tell you a little anecdote. The danger of anecdote is that they slow me down, but I can't resist telling you this little anecdote. A number of years ago, I was giving a talk on interactive teaching, peer instruction, at a university. I won't name it. Let me just say a well-known university in Connecticut, in the physics department. And after my talk, a professor came to me and said, I had something really interesting happening in my course this year. He had been teaching physics to engineering students. And in order to motivate the students, he thought, I'm going to put the physics that I'm teaching them in a real world context. And the context that he was using was baseball. I mean, there's a lot of physics in baseball, right? Collisions between balls and bats, trajectories of balls as they're flying through the air, runners running, you name it. Lots of physics is embedded in that context. And so in class, he would use examples from baseball. And on the homework, he would put baseball problems. And on the midterm exams, he would put baseball problems. At the end of the semester, he was preparing the final exam, and he realized he had run out of baseball problems. So he put some football problems on the exam. Professor, complained the students, we have never done any football problems before. You might be laughing or smiling, but we should really be crying, because in a sense, this reveals how little these students, and maybe our students in general, learn. Because you have to admit, if you cannot take what you've learned in a narrow context and apply that outside of that context, you have not really learned. So let me dig a little bit more deeply. And I'm a crazy physicist, so I often encounter things and turn them into little thought problems for myself. And let me tell you how this originated. I was this is many years ago. I was painting my dining room on a Saturday, and early in the morning I realized I didn't have enough paint. So I hopped in my car. I went to Harvard Square, where there's a hardware store. And I don't know if you've ever been to Harvard Square, but there's a motel. It keeps changing the name. I think it's called the Harvard Lodge, I forgot. It keeps changing its name, but it sits on stilts, if you want, elevated from street level. And at street level, there are parking spaces. So it's a nice big parking area right smack near Harvard Square. And there are two streets on either side. One is Mount Auburn Street, the other, I forgot the name, I don't know. And essentially there are two parts to the garage. One that connects Mount Auburn Street to that other street in one direction, and then there's one back. And on that Saturday morning, which was a busy Saturday morning, I arrived there, and as usual, coming in from Mount Auburn Street, there were no spaces free. So I pulled out on the other end and then went back in on the other side of the parking lot, no spaces, and then pulled out back to Mount Auburn Street and then pulled through again. You know, I normally what I would do is I would go around and around and around until somebody freed up a spot. But you know what usually happens then, right? You're in the right half of the garage, or one of the two halves, because when you come back, it's the other half is the right half, and you see, oh, there's a spot on the other half, and you pull out, and before you can pull in the other half of the garage, there's another car in front of you that takes the spot. So that Saturday morning, I don't know why, maybe I was in a Zen mood, I decided, you know what, I'm not going to do that going around and around and around. I'm just going to stay put in one side and turn off the engine and just wait for somebody to show up. And I don't care if somebody shows up on the other side. And as I turned off the engine, crazy physicist that I am, I started thinking, you know, how long is it going to take before somebody shows up? And I started to think about it. And within about a minute and a half, I got to the answer, 3 minutes. So I looked at my watch and I started timing. And you know what? A minute and a half later, somebody showed up right in front of me and left an open spot. I felt so good. Now imagine we take that and give that as a problem to our students. On a Saturday afternoon, you pull into a parking lot with unmetered spaces near a shopping area. You circle around, but there are no empty spots. You decide to wait at one end of the lot where you can see and command about 20 spaces. How long do you have to wait before somebody frees up a space? I guarantee you, if you put this on one of your exams, the students are going to go to the dean to try to get you fired. Certainly at my institution, but I would not be surprised if the same would be true at your institution. But think about it in terms of Bloom's taxonomy. What are the skills needed to solve this problem? Well, you need to make assumptions. You need to develop a model that you've not seen before. And then you need to apply that model. In terms of Bloom's taxonomy, we're all the way at the top of this pyramid. Now, we don't want our students to get upset and get us fired. So let's try now to take this problem and slowly simplify it so it becomes a standard textbook problem. Of those skills here in the bottom left, which is the one that our students hate the most? Which is the one that is the most scary of those? Creating, but I didn't list creating. I said on the left, assumptions, developing a model, or applying that model. What is the one that is the most frightening to a student? Okay, most people seem to focus on developing a model. Now we get a few people assumptions. Yeah, I think assumptions are very scary to students for the following reason, and this ties it to assessment. What if you make the wrong assumption? What if you make the wrong assumption? If you make the wrong assumption, you get the wrong answer, and therefore you're not going to get credit for your work. We have taught our students to avoid making assumptions. If I put any problem on a high stakes assessment, I don't have any exams in my course anymore. I don't have any high stakes assessment anymore. But if I were to do that with Harvard students, the first thing that would happen is that they would raise their hand and say, Professor Mazur, am I supposed to assume here that blah, 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 blah? They want me to take the responsibility for assumptions, not them. But think about it. What distinguishes one engineer from another, one business person from another, one scientist from another, one doctor from another? It's not the ability to apply rote procedures. It's the ability to make informed assumptions and to be flexible enough to revise those assumptions. Anyway, the most important thing is that we don't get fired. So let's change this problem so that at least they don't have to make assumptions. So I'm going to add one sentence to this problem. On average, people shop for 2 hours. 2 days is obviously too long. 2 minutes is too short. 2 hours is sort of in the middle of the two. So that's perhaps a reasonable starting assumption. Well, this still scores quite highly on Bloom's taxonomy. Maybe we've gone down, maybe we've gone down a tiny little bit. The top has become white here, but we still are quite high on Bloom's taxonomy. And still students will, not be very happy, even though the assumption has been taken for them. Why do we have to answer a problem about a parking lot in a physics class or in a chemistry class or in a humanities class or in a philosophy class? So let's now remove the model. Or actually remove the need to develop a model. Let's implicitly put the model inside the problem. I add one more sentence. Assuming people leave at regularly spaced intervals. Now we've reduced this essentially to an applying problem, one where you have to apply something you've learned, namely that people might leave at regularly spaced intervals. They don't quite do that, but this is a pretty good approximation anyway, and do that. Well, I think this would still not fly with most of our students because they would say, Professor, we've never done any parking lot problems before. So let's now take this problem and we turn it into a standard textbook or assessment problem. Are you ready? Here we go. On a Saturday afternoon, you pull into a parking lot with unmetered spaces near a shopping area where people are known to shop on average for 2 hours. You circle around, but there are no empty spots. You decide to wait at one end of the lot where you can see and command about 20 spaces. How long do you have to wait before somebody frees up a space? I can already hear you think, isn't that the problem that we started with? Yes, but somewhere in the course of instruction or somewhere in the textbook, the student have encountered this equation. The time that you wait is equal to the average time that people shop divided by the number of spaces, colloquially known as the parking lot equation. And you've memorized that equation and you recognize that this problem is a parking lot problem, and all you need to do is plug in the numbers that are given, 2 hours and 20 spaces, into this equation to get the answer. Maybe I've oversimplified a little bit. And I certainly think that in the humanities, you tend not to assess your students with such procedural or low-level problems. But I think in the sciences and engineering and most STEM fields, we still are very much in this mode of assessment and this category of teaching and testing. And as I alluded to earlier, I think that's particularly important in the current age because, computers can do this. My phone can do this with infinitely more patience and accuracy than myself. And therefore, just as, assembly line jobs have been replaced by robots, I predict that any type of job that relies on memorization or the application of rote procedures will be replaced by devices like this. So our task as educators is really to push students up a level or two, or preferably 3, on Bloom's taxonomy, to push them to become real problem solvers, because that is what our IT devices cannot yet do as well as the human mind. So, you know, to highlight the difficulty that poses in assessment, let me argue this. In an authentic problem, you know, it's not that there is a one-step approach to solving that problem. You try something, it doesn't work. Oops, I've made the wrong assumption, or my model is not quite correct. You try a second time, and again, it doesn't work. You try a third time, and maybe it works. You see, the path to innovation, the path to creativity is littered with failures. And in general, assessment and education, the way it's practiced, stigmatizes failure. Failure is a bad thing. Even though, if you think about any real innovative process, it goes hand in hand with failure. Thomas Edison didn't just invent the light bulb. He saw it, he had a light bulb moment, so to speak, and he thought, this is the light bulb. No, he's said to have had 300 failed prototypes. Most people would have said, Thomas, you're wasting your time. But he saw each failure as a step closer towards creating the elusive light bulb that he wanted to create. Now, the type of assessment that is practiced so widely around the world, and it's getting even worse with automated assessment, and I think it's perpetuated by the type of things that the ETS does, including advanced placement and SATs and so on. It's completely incompatible with that, because the student is completely focused on getting to the right or to the desired answer without any failures. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. This picture needs, I think, no words. It's familiar to us all. And you see right away, you know, what is happening here. So I would like to ask you what kind of feelings this picture evokes. Oh, Fiona already put it down before I asked. This picture makes my heart sink, depressing, assembly line, anxiety, discouraging, stress. Aren't these all words that are so beautifully conducive to learning? Without stress, you couldn't learn. Without anxiety, you couldn't learn. Heiju Zhang wrote something really, really interesting. I was going to ask you what was particularly striking about this picture. And no, I didn't plant this with, who was it again? Heiju Zhang. I did not. I was going to ask you, what do you note in this picture? And what is particularly interesting is the sense of isolation that Heiju Zhang picked on immediately. Look at these individuals. They're completely cut off from each other. They only have, let me take that word isolation away for a second. They only have pencils. There's no modern device. There's no phone. There's no computer. There's nothing there. They have what? Oh, pardon me. I clicked on the wrong arrow here. They still are wearing a watch. I heard, I don't know if this is true, I heard that for the SETs that are in person, you're no longer allowed to wear a watch because it could be a smartwatch. So we'll have to show up on exams like that naked because, you know, something could be smart about what we're wearing. It's quite unsettling. But imagine that. All of these students here are completely cut off from each other, and they are completely cut off from any source of information. Why? Because that's exactly how they will be working later in society. And that was a joke, of course. Think about it. Since you last took an exam in college, graduate school, whatever, can you think of any situation in your professional life where you have equally been cut off from any source of information or other human beings? I can't think of any. I can't think of any. In fact, society depends on people working with one another. Progress is made in teams by working together. Individuals are not assessed purely on their individual performance, but how they work with others and how individuals together can accomplish more than any single individual by themselves. So why in the world do we assess students in this way if we know deep down in our hearts that they'll never function like that in society? Let me make another little jump here and switch here. Traditionally, assessment has been a high stakes affair, culminating in the final exam. In fact, students study for exams and faculty encourage them to do so. But you know, high stakes exams promote cramming. And we already know what cramming does. It stores information in short-term memory, and therefore there's neither retention nor transfer. In fact, according to Redinger, after 3 days or after a week, you know, you retain very little. In fact, after 3 days, you don't even retain that much. And you know what? This was highlighted to me by something that happened on my own campus a few years ago. I was, again, on one of my trips giving a talk in Hong Kong. And I did that during the examination period. I had no final exam in my course, so, you know, I was free to travel and give a talk. Hong Kong, Boston, opposite side of the globe, 12-hour time difference. I remember after a long day, it was about 7 p.m. I was on my way to the hotel. I got sort of an emergency alert system from the university on my phone. It said, if you're on campus, stay inside your room. If you're not on campus, stay away from campus. I thought, what? I was not on campus, so it was not a problem. But I thought, what in the world is happening? So I got to my hotel, I turned on the TV, I turned on my computer, and I had CNN, and there was a live shot from my own campus with the you know, several buildings cordoned off with yellow tape. Turns out there was a student who had made a bomb threat. First day of examinations, bomb threat in 3 different buildings on campus. Anyway, I shook my head, turned the TV off, and, you know, half an hour later, another emergency text alert saying, you know, everything is clear, you can get out again, no bombs were found, it's safe. About 10 minutes later comes an email from the dean to the entire academic community. As you've undoubtedly heard, there's been a bomb threat. Luckily, there were no bombs, blah, blah, blah. In light of, you know, this disturbance, we have decided to postpone the exams that we're going to be given that morning, 2 hours after this incident, and this was still before the incident. We're going to postpone them for 3 days. And the next sentence got my attention because the dean said, we realize that this is an inconvenience for the students because they have studied for the exam. Can you imagine that? Postponing the exam for 3 days is a problem because the student have studied. Put it in the context of Redinger's work. And yeah, if you've just studied for memorization, it is a problem because the memory might fade. But is that what we want to accomplish with our testing? In a sense, high stakes assessment is this silent killer of educational innovation. No matter how innovative the approach to teaching, it's the assessment that drives study habits. And students are going to be forced to rely on low level. Instead of studying for exams, students should really be studying for learning and understanding. And assessment, as some of you pointed out earlier on, should be used as an opportunity to improve learning. I would say frequent assignments and detailed feedback, that's what is central to student learning. So that brings me to my next point. The point I'm making here is that final exams, and luckily my institutions is slowly, diminishing the importance of final exams. It used to be that if you did not want to have a final exam, you had to petition that with the registrar, no final exam. Now, if you have a final exam, you have to let the registrar know. You don't have to petition, you have to let the registrar know. So I think that's a shift in the right direction. So let's think about grades too. Grades are a measure of relative standing to others. I'm an A, he's a C, she's a B. Oh, I must be better than the two of them. At the same time, the other thing that is important in exams, and a lot of you pointed it out earlier on, is feedback. A reflection on what has been learned. But the problem is that in the presence of grades, feedback very rapidly fades in importance in the mind of the students. There's a lot of work, you can Google it easily, that shows that if you take grades away, students take the feedback very seriously. If you have grades, the feedback doesn't matter that much. And here's another anecdote. I know I shouldn't be giving too many anecdotes because it's going to slow me down, but I can't resist telling you this. About the importance of not having grades. As I was thinking about developing this talk a number of years ago, I got invited to give a talk at the Nueva School in Hillsborough, California. It's an affluent suburb of San Francisco, south on the peninsula. And I had sort of a precursor of this talk. And I started this talk by doing that little exercise that I did with you. What is the purpose of grading? Now, I was on the campus of a middle school there, and this was sort of a professional development day for the teachers on the campus and schools around the Nueva School. And there were a number of middle school students who were ushering the people from one building to another between talks. And since they didn't have anything to do during the talks, they sat down and listened in. So in my case, I had 3 middle school students on the second row of my audience. And when I asked the audience to feed back to me, to report back to me on the purposes of assessment, the first ones to raise their hand were these middle schoolers. But I didn't want to hear from the students. I wanted to hear from the faculty. So I ignored them. And, a little bit later, some faculty started raising their hands. And I went, but they kept their hand up. And, and at some point they started standing and raising their hands. So eventually I caved in and I said, sure, what do you think is the approach? I like it when my teacher gives me feedback on where I can improve or what I haven't done that well. It was all metacognition. It was all reflection on their own learning, one after the other. I went, wow, this is just amazing. I mean, I wish my students at Harvard were like that. And I thought, I got to talk to these students when my talk is over. My talk ended, and unfortunately they left right away because they had to usher people again. So I went over to one of the teachers there and I said, these students, they were just amazing. And the teacher got a huge smile on his face, and he said to me, we don't have any grades. no grades, completely focused on the learning, not on the ranking. So I think that is such a powerful anecdote. It's such an important thing. Another thing that I think is third problem that I'd like to highlight is that assessment produces a conflict in us as educators. And I discovered this when I switched to my current course, my current design of my current course, which is a team-based and a project-based course. And the ultimate deliverables of the course throughout the term are projects that the students is working on. I want to unleash their creativity. I want to unleash their inner motivation. I try to add to the projects a component of social good. And you know, and the first year that I did that, I was so excited to see the energy with which the students, you know, delved into their projects and all the fantastic things that they built. And then, you know, at the end of the project, there had to be some kind of a fair. And in my, you know, naive thinking, I decided with my co-instructor to become the judge of the projects. And I discovered that it was an extremely uncomfortable position. Here I had been the entire semester encouraging, or the entire months, because each project is a month, my student. And now all of a sudden during the fair, I made this Jekyll and Hyde transition to becoming a judge. And frankly, I started wondering, how is it possible that in all these years, I have been judging my own students? I can't really think of any other part of society where it's the person doing the thing who is judging. You know, a doctor says, sorry, I operated on you and I put on the wrong thing, but I did a good job. Or, you know, the coach who goes with an athlete to the Olympics and says, do your best, I'll be on the judging bench. I mean, we wouldn't accept that. How is it possible that in education we can get away with that? We can become our own judges. The more I think about it, the more I'm starting to think that the type of you know, what we've constructed in education is like a cartel almost. We are there judging ourselves. It's true with accreditation too. You look at accreditation of universities and schools, we accredit each other. There is no external accreditation of it. We really are a cartel. How is that? How I ask myself, you know, how did I get away with it for so many years? I've taught at Harvard now for almost 40 years, and I've always been fine being the ones who scores the exam. And I think that we resolve that conflict by hiding behind a very thin veil of objectivity. I am going to judge you in a completely objective way that takes away any emotional aspect, and that is completely reliable. In fact, you know, for ETS, the number one rule for assessment is it has to be reproducible and reliable. But, you know, come to think about it, let's go back to Bloom's taxonomy. Of those skills that are listed, or those thinking skills that are listed there, which is the one that can be truly objectively assessed? Is the one at the top objectively accessible? I don't think so. Things that are very creative might only be recognized as being creative after the innovator has passed away. Very sad, but true. It's very hard to especially because people are so resistant to change. It's really very difficult to recognize innovation and creativity right away. I think the only skill that's truly objectively accessible is all the way at the bottom of Bloom's taxonomy. So in a sense, we force ourselves down Bloom's taxonomy. Take that problem about the car going along the road and hitting a tree. If you answer plus 4.2 meters per second, right. If you say plus 4.2, wrong, you forgot the units. If say plus 8.4 meters per second, wrong. You made a mistake somewhere. If you put minus 4 meters per second, wrong. You got it in the wrong direction. It's a very clear-cut line between right and wrong, and we tend to gravitate towards that case. And there are so many other problems, but I need to wrap up here, so I'm gonna go from problems to some potential solutions, like grade inflation and cheating. Think about it. Many people claim cheating is a problem with students. I don't think so. Cheating is a problem with the way we're assessing students. And we need to design our assessment in a way that makes cheating impossible. I'll give you some examples in just a moment. So let's go to potential improvements. And I see there are many in chat. I'm dying to read what you're all thinking, but I can't talk and read at the same time. So I'll catch up later. And if there's something truly important, then I hope the moderators will feel free to interrupt me. So let's go to improvements. I think the first improvement we should do is that in our assessment, we should mimic real life. I mean, why cut off people from information? When I write a paper about nanophotonics, which is my research area, I can look up any paper on the internet I want. I can go and talk to colleagues. I mean, there's not somebody standing next to me with a ruler and saying, Eric, you're not allowed to look that up. You should have known this. I can pull in any information I want. I can talk to anybody I want. So why are we insisting on testing students, cutting them off from the information sources? And you know, I've been teaching pre-meds a lot and engineering students who are not going to go on in physics. And I realized, you know, the value to them of memorizing equations is very little. So I've been an early adapter of open book exams, which is actually, it didn't go in one step. It went into little steps. Initially I said, you know what, I'm going to provide students with a formula sheet. This is not a formula sheet, it's a bill I got, but it's the only piece of paper on my desk here right now. So at the exam, they would get a formula sheet. And I remember that the following year, the students had access to that formula sheet because I'd already prepared it before the exam. And some students asked me, could we bring in our own formula sheet? I thought about it and I said, you know what? You can take one X card, one side, where you can write the equations you want to bring to the exam, only to discover that the students develop absolutely microscopic handwriting skills and they put half of the textbook on one side of an index card. So the next year I said to myself, you know what, let's just have them bring the book, right? I mean, they still have to be able to find the relevant information in the book. So you can bring the book. The following year, I had some students who came to me and they said, look, in high school, I had this other textbook that I use, which I actually like more than the textbook that you're using in this course. Could I bring the textbook that I used in high school? And I thought about it for a moment. And then I thought, if I let this student bring his textbook, then, you know, other students have used other textbook in high school, then I should, you know, let them use any textbook. So I thought, okay, they can bring any, and then, you know, and then some other students said, you know, can we bring the solutions to our homework and our notes to the course? So I thought about this and I said, you know what? You can bring anything you want to the exam except another living person. And, you know, some students would walk in with a pile of material to their exams. It was quite a change. But then as we entered into the information age and as laptops and smartphones start to play a bigger role, I was wondering, you know, should I even let students use computers? In fact, I was starting to move my assessment to computer work because that's how we work in society. And I thought, you know, now they will have access to Google. Should I shut off the internet or the search engine in the place where I'm assessing them? But Think about it. Let's go back again to Bloom's taxonomy. What does Google do? What it actually does is kicks out this bottom level from Bloom's taxonomy, because that's what Google is good at, coughing up information. I mean, yes, I have to make sure that the problem that I am giving them is not simply Googleable, but in a sense, giving them access to Google forces me up the ladder of Bloom's taxonomy, forces me to give them a more meaningful assessment than one that could simply be Googled. I'm going to make a small jump here. I'm going to show you a short video clip. This is from an institution in Indonesia. I forgot the name of the city. It's just west of the capital, Jakarta. I'm drawing a blank here. Terrible. It's actually their best university. It'll come back. And the students are speaking Malay, so unless you're from Malaysia or Indonesia, you won't be able to follow what they're saying, which is on purpose because I don't want you to hear what they're saying. I want you to look at that, and there'll be a quiz afterwards. Is one, what are these students doing? And two, what is the discipline of the course in which this little video was taken? So here we go. And if there's no audio or anything, put on the alarm button here. There should be audio. So what are these students doing? What part of instruction is this? And what is the disciplines? Now, maybe that what is the discipline is a question that would not be very nice because you can't pick up the language. So let me tell you, it is a course on statistics. Have you ever seen students having fun with statistics? Well, there you go. So let's see what people say. They're figuring something out. Active learning, social, sharing answer. Let's see if there's Janae Skinner has the answer there. They are actually taking an exam. Yes. The very first time that came across this is something from team-based learning. And if you're not familiar with team-based learning, I think it's the next best thing, or one of the next best things in education. And everybody should adopt team-based learning because we have a moral obligation. And I think this is part of equitable education, to teach students to work together. Education is completely focused on the individual, and then we deliver them to society. They learn to compete with each other rather than collaborate. And if you look in society, most problems of society can be traced back to people not getting along with people. So look at team-based learning, one word.org. But this is an assessment approach from team-based learning. The first time I got across this was when I visited the University of Delaware. I was Phi Beta Kappa visiting scholar there, which gives you an opportunity to be on campus for 3 days or so, and then visit different departments and give talks in different departments. That visit was actually a very scary visit for me because I was asked to give a talk in the psychology department, and I thought, oh my God, I'm not a psychologist. They're going to kill me. It wasn't that bad. It was actually great. But on my visit, on my schedule, was a visit to a biochemistry class. And I remember going to the right building, the right floor, and I found a room. And I went into the room. It was still empty, and there was a professor. There were round tables, 5 round tables or 6 round tables. And the professor putting pieces of paper on the table. And I introduced myself and said, "Oh, it's great that you're visiting today." So I thought, I had a big smile on my face. And he said, "Yeah, because we have an exam today." I thought, that's weird. What should I do during an exam, right? And I said, if you want, I can go outside and check up on my email. And I time to catch up on my email. And so it was great. And I said, and when you're done with starting the exam, we can talk. And he said, no. I want you to take the exam. I thought, what? And I said, what's the exam about? And he said, hemoglobin. I said, I don't know anything about hemoglobin. But before I could protest, I found myself at a table with other students. And, I have to admit, my mood took a turn for the negative. I thought, why in the world do I need to do this? Anyway, he had the exam was printed side down in front of me. And then at some point he said, okay, you can turn the exam around and start answering the question. So I turned my piece of paper around, and they were all multiple choice questions. I hate multiple choice. So, and I looked at the questions. I really had no idea, no clue. So I said, why in the world is he having me do this? Can't I just go outside and do my email? But I didn't want to be impolite. And I noticed that there was also a little strip of paper that had the numbers of the questions and a place to put the answer. And he asked everybody to actually write down their answers on that little strip of paper, 1, C, 2, B, and so on. Anyway, I just left mine blank, and I sat there, sort of annoyed. And after about 10 minutes, he started collecting those individual pieces of paper. So the students kept the exam in front of them where they had marked their answers to, but he collected those little strips of paper. And then he put on each table a card like this called an if-at card, immediate feedback assessment technique. And my team wrote its team number down, team 3, and all of these squares were covered. And I had no idea what it was. This is sort of the ink that you see on a lottery card that you need to scratch away. And the people at my table immediately went, "Who wants to be the scratcher?" They looked at me too. I had no idea what a scratcher was, so I just sat there. And then one student said, "I'll be the scratcher." So they gave him that card, and the scratcher then said, one was a pretty easy question. I had C. What did you think? So they went around the table, and almost everybody had C. I had nothing. I just kept silent there. So the scratcher said, "Shall I scratch off C?" Everybody approved, and scratch off C. And as you can see here in the picture, a star was revealed, and they went, "Yeah!" And I thought, okay, so now we're turning this in multiple choice exam into a game. Can I please go and do my email? And anyway, but then something interesting happened. They turned to the second question, and half the table had answered B, and the other half had answered A. The A's didn't want B to be scratched off. The B's didn't want A to be scratched off. And all of a sudden they went, "Don't you remember in class, the professor said that when hemoglobin, blah, blah, blah," they started to talk like biochemists. It was no longer about the answer, but about why. And after a few minutes of discussion, they settled on B as the answer. They scratched off B, no star. So they said, could it be A? And then somebody at the table went, "Well, remember when you said that?" And they started arguing, and then a number of students went, "Oh, yes, that's right. I think I could go with A." And here's the genius of the method. If you don't get it right if you get it right the first time, you get 4 points. If you don't get it right the first time, you get a second try at half credit, as you can see here. And if you don't get it right the second time, you get a third try at quarter credit. And if you still don't get it right, you get 0 credit. And as the students completed this, whenever a team was done, they walked out the room. The whole class was noisy, but they walked out of the room knowing instantly what their score was, because half of the credit is the team credit, 23. The other half of the credit is the individual answer. So you have an interest at doing really, really well by yourself, and then interesting in getting the team to do as well as possible. Absolutely phenomenal and fantastic. And you know what the best, so they walked out of this room totally relaxed, and they had learned, they had aha moments during the test. And you know what the best thing was? No grading. It's all graded automatically. I walked away there, so excited. So how can I incorporate it into my class? But I didn't, because I don't really like multiple choice exams. And it was only many years later that I managed to incorporate that on the computer, which is why I don't cut off students from Google. But essentially, for my class, we developed a platform. Now it's owned by Pearson, unfortunately, but it was freely available before, called Learning Analytics, where you can type in equations and you can type in text answers, and you can make sketches, and it all can be evaluated by the program. So in the individual round, you write the answer, and in the team round, you can see the answers that other people gave in your team, and essentially it works pretty much the same as a scratch card, but now the questions can be open-ended. They still have to have one or a set of correct or desired answers that can be auto-scored, and there are many different question types that can be auto-scored, but it gives a little bit more flexibility than a simple multiple choice. Here's a little video of how this works in my class. So for the first 20 minutes, it's like a regular exam, almost it's silent, but they have access to the computer, so they can equal things and they work things out. And then at some point, I press a button and it turns into the team round.
This one? Yeah. So let's say B. It's across that's number 13 out of yeah. Who does? I do. Oh, jeez. I wrote for 5. I said it in ODL. She was like 3, 2, and
E would make the magnetic field coming out of the board. And so that would be so it'd be thumb cross.
So yeah, they're taking an assessment, if you want, and they're having fun. And during the pandemic, I took the bold step. I haven't talked about this at all yet, so you're among the very first ones to hear this. I took the bold step of making this 100% asynchronous. 100% asynchronous, and the learning gains are larger than they were before the pandemic, and they persisted in the current year where we've returned back to the classroom. Okay, so the other thing, focus on feedback, not ranking, right? I mean, the ranking is detrimental. It takes away the intrinsic motivation to learn. And I think that objective ranking is a myth. I mean, we are rejecting people who could be extremely successful in society. And I would say some of the people who have affected society the most are dropouts. I can make a long list, even at my own institution. Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, who dropped out by the traditional ranking standards. They were at the bottom. So, and I can actually highlight that with some of my own data. Early in my career, I started measuring how much real conceptual understanding there was in my course, and I started to compare it to the final grade. And yes, there is some correlation. So students for the conceptual understanding answer 29 questions, and the score depends on the number of questions you get correct. According to the person who developed this instrument, anybody scoring below 20, 2 is an Aristotelian thinker, is still back in, the BC area, not before computers, before Christ. is, it has not assimilated the essence of Newton's law, which underpins an entire physics course. So some 60% of students came out of my course without even understanding what I taught them or didn't teach them in the first week of classes. But look at this. Among the top performers here, the ones who are, let's say, at this level of a graduate student, when I took the test, I got 28 out of 29. I must have misread a question. I actually made a real honest mistake, okay? But if you take professors and graduate students and postdocs, they tend to score in those last 3 bins. And you see, I get some students who are there, but there's a huge distribution of final grade scores. And look at this. This student here, who was a Newtonian thinker, got a C. This student here, who had no clue, did not understand, was still an Aristotelian clue, got an A. Is that objectivity, or is that an injustice? I don't know what happened to this student who I gave a C in the course. Maybe I derailed his or her entire career by giving that score. I'm agonizing about that. So I think ranking is more an injustice. I almost tend to think of high stakes exams and scores, which I was still using back in the 90s when I collected these data, as a sort of an ancient form of hazing ritual, really. It's really a filter that keeps out people who are thinking differently out rather than including them. Third thing is, let's focus on skill, not content. And some of you may be familiar with Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe's book, Understanding by Design, right? The traditional approach to course planning is you start with content, and then at the end of the course, you ask yourself, or maybe during the course, how am I going to test that they understand or know, 2 fuzzy words, the course content. What Jay McTighe and Grant Wiggins are advocating is starting at the output end and use what is called backwards design. What are the desired outcomes? And then once you formulate tentative outcomes, ask yourself, what am I going to take as evidence that I've accomplished those outcomes? And if I can think of a way of doing that, I have to reformulate my outcomes so that I can actually measure them. And then, what is the instructional approach I'm going to use to maximize the desired outcome? The great thing about this approach is that the course is now defined by the outcomes, but here's the important part. If you have well-formulated outcomes, you already have thought about the assessment before you even start about thinking about the rest of the course design. And lastly, how do we resolve the coach-judge conflict? Well, you know what I did in my own course with these projects? I used external evaluators. Let my colleagues be the bad guys. And you know what it does? It also holds me accountable to my colleagues. And if my colleagues think, oh, what Eric Mazur is doing in this class is, just, like kindergarten, the students are just having fun and playing, but they're not really learning, well, let them talk to my student and make sure. And it also validates my approach in the eyes of the students. Oh, my mechanical engineering professor is here at the fair to evaluate us, right? So I think it's very important that we do not rely too much on self-evaluation of our own teaching. Another thing that I've incorporated very heavily in my new course design is peer and self-assessment. Ultimately, students have to be able to judge themselves, because once they graduate, once you give them their diploma, we're not there to tell them if they're doing well or not. They have to evaluate whether they're doing well or not. Do we train them to do that? I think often we don't, and we should. One way is to use calibrated peer review. Unfortunately, I have no time to talk about it. It was developed actually at UCLA. I think it's a great way of not having pure self and peer evaluation, but to find a way of calibrating that to the standards of the instructors. And you may want to look at that if you have time and if you haven't heard about it. Let me end here. I really want to I really want to end with a call to action. And the call to action is very simple. We need to rethink assessment so it supports the learning. We need to focus on the assessment of skills, not content. And above all, we need to change the assessment environment and in a way so that it mimics more the reality of our students' future careers and lives. We need to use assessment as a way of encouraging students to take ownership of their learning. Unless we do so, we'll continue to educate the followers of yesterday rather than the leaders of tomorrow. And just as importantly, I think our test results will not adequately reflect a person's ability to succeed in the world, and thereby automatically not really yield an equitable education. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mazur. This was very inspirational, and I definitely can see in the chat and even in my own notes, this has given me so much to think about. The question that I saw, kind of a theme. Oh, okay, Dr. Eric, I will call you Eric. First of all, it's so helpful to have someone who is of your stature with the gravitas behind you to preach this to all of us. I'm seeing fantastic, and thank you. Because I think a lot of us here really do share this perspective. And so I'm going to collapse a question that I'm seeing a thread of it that does talk a lot about grades and this concept of quality that I'm seeing in these questions. So I'll kind of give you a few together in relation to grades, if that's okay. But one is, do grades create the concept of quality in higher education, or is there some element of truth to that? There's also this concept of how do we grade without standardized tests, and this concept of mastering learning, where we can see someone's learning, but this concept of mastery. And as that, I'm going to throw in my own little question here. A lot of this words like mastery, quality, ranking, classification really harkens a colonial perspective to me. These are very words that were part of the British Empire. And that's just a note that I took. So I just wanted to get your thoughts a little bit more about this concept of grade, quality, and perception, and how we might be able to make a sea change in this.
You know, thank you so much for the question. I'm really so happy you're asking that. And I've been struggling with that. I mean, remember the anecdote I told you about those middle schoolers at the Nueva school, right? And then to discover how radically it changed their attitudes towards learning by not having grades. Oh, that was such an eye-opener. And I was thinking, you know, given that grades don't typically reflect how well people end up doing in society, why do we have them? And, you know, the history of grades doesn't go back that long. It's a relatively recent invention. We've educated for a long time without grades. And I think at that time it was much better. Unfortunately, we're slaves of simple metrics and data. In fact, we evaluate teaching by asking students to evaluate us with some simple numerical questions. And I don't think we're always very happy to see how that pans out, even if our students might have learned some very valuable skills. So I remember a number of years ago, probably 6 years ago, I gave an earlier version of this talk at Harvard. After that, about 300 of my colleagues across all departments. And after that, the dean of the college dean of undergraduate education, took me out to dinner at the faculty club. He was all pumped up. And he said, we have to eliminate grades. Here we are, something like 6 years later, and we still have grades. And when I redesigned my course, I thought, you know what, rather than having just a single numerical skill, I'm going to evaluate my students according to the 4 major learning outcomes in my course: self-directed learning, content mastery, collaborative skills, and professionalism. But at the end, the registrar says, I need a grade from you. So I had to sort of collapse this this four-dimensional measurement into a grade, and in a sense, you throw away the baby with the bathwater. The big breakthrough actually came at the beginning of this pandemic when we were forced off campus. Well, the academic year after we were forced off campus, so fall 2020, when I stumbled on an approach that I think people should, I'm never going to look back, that I'd never heard of, namely specifications grading. You can Google, maybe somebody can quickly do it and put the article there. There's an article online called Yes, Virginia, There's a Better Approach to Grading. I think it's something like that inside higher ed. It has been amazing, okay? In a sense, rather than having midterms and exams and so on, you have continuous formative assessment. And in my case, I break my course into 68 little units where students either meet specifications or they don't meet specifications. And if they don't meet specifications, they can try again, and they can try again. And at the end of the course, you're not evaluated how well or poorly you did on a few assessments. You're evaluated on how many units you met specifications for. And you can convert that into a grade if you need to. I would still prefer not to convert it to a grade because I don't think the grade is that meaningful, but at least it provides a transition from the traditional approach to grading to not having grades. It's been an enormous change in how my students, who are very grade driven, okay? We have some of the most competitive students you can imagine, who are there. I wouldn't say the best students. They may be the best by the grades they get, but by the skills they have, they're definitely not. And by the intrinsic motivation they have to learn, they're not either. But this has been an incredible change in their attitudes towards learning. And a lot of them say, wow, all of a sudden, I realize that a lot of my other introductory courses are, I've never heard this term before, cram and flush. You cram for the exam, you take the exam, and then quickly flush the knowledge so that you can make space for other things that you need to memorize. So I highly recommend you or anybody who has questions about that to look into that article. And then there are many other supporting documents to show how to implement that. Great question.
Thank you. Another one, when you open this up, you talked about that this seems to be a neglected aspect of our profession. And I would agree with that. What do you think has happened? Because I think a lot of us here, as you said, we are the choir. And one of the things that I experience at my institution, and some of us do, is that there are some who are resistant or see SLOs as something, they address them kind of begrudgingly. Why do you think this has happened? Why is this something that's become something that's kind of neglected?
I think in spite it's the information revolution and the fact that, and I think the pandemic has precipitated even more, because during the year that we're all forced off campus, all of a sudden, people realized we can't really just do our usual testing anymore. So I think two things are slowly precipitating change. The realization we live in an information age. Information is ubiquitous. It's become harder and harder to test people, cutting them off from information. Let me actually see if I can pull up after I gave my talk. Let me see if I can find that just very quickly. Somebody sent me an article online that shows, I can't find it, that shows an exam in India. Yes, here it is. Okay, where military cadets are being tested, and apparently cheating is so rampant there that they have to test them outside and in their underwear in order not to cheat on the exam. I mean, that's kind of extreme, of course, but I think with all our devices that we have, from smartwatch to smartphone, we're getting into a problem that we have to adjust our assessment practices if we're still steeped in sort of ancient assessment practices. So I think that that's one reason. And I hope, my hope is that when we revert back to the classroom under completely normal circumstances, hopefully soon, that we will not just revert our assessment practices back to what they were before.
Excellent.
Yeah, and Chelsea said something interesting, right? A big part of acquiring grades is due to funding. I mean, it's so true. I mean, I speak a lot to K-12 audiences, and there are so many teachers who are so well-meaning and are really focused on the learning of their students, but they have their hands tied by standards and by an accountability that push students in the wrong direction. And unfortunately, in our institutions, yours and mine, we get the products of K-12 education. So if students there, learn to pass exams by memorizing and with simple metrics come to us, they bring those habits with them. So I think it's our moral obligation, all of us here, not only to try to change our own practices, but also to influence K-12, politicians, the ETS. I mean, it's moving a mountain. But the great thing is that people are coming up with ideas like specification grades that doesn't require us to go from where we are now to the ideal situation in one step. We can sort of take an intermediate step on the way up there.
Thank you so much. Yarrick has one final question. And again, thank you so much, Eric.
Right on.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Leanne, Amanda, thank you very much. Eric, if you don't mind, there is in the audience, we have a number of faculty leaders, coordinators, and people who work with faculty at colleges and other institutions throughout the country. Just very quickly, if you could please comment on the issue of professional development, because you have certainly laid groundwork for us. We do know what needs to be done. We do have a theory. I think that the themes you've repeated just very, very well underscore the topics of our conversation. So we are certainly grateful for this. The question really is, okay, what are the next steps? How do we actually make it happen? How do we interact with faculty? The funding is only the beginning of this, right? We have this structure of higher education that we face on a daily basis. And I tell you that the message that that's being repeated throughout our conversations that we've been having in Friday SLO talks and other conversations is, what do we do on Monday morning? What do we do from now on?
A lot of work. There's a lot of work ahead for us, and for the reasons that I have said. And I think that the first thing is not to get discouraged by the amount of work ahead, and to realize that we won't get to our end goal in one step. And this is not going to take 1 year or 2 years. It's not going to be solved by next week. And we have to all take small steps. And, thinking about opening up our students who are being assessed to the world by giving them access to Google and so on, by incorporating team-based exams where they work together, by changing the grading to from a purely numerical grade as we had before to a specifications types grading. I think we can start the ball rolling in the right direction. That's would be my recommendation. And yes, we won't be getting immediately where we need to be, but at least we'll be moving in the right direction.
Right on. Thank you very much. Really appreciate this, Eric. This just been fantastic. Thank you very much for the support. Thank you so much for being with us. We are moving on to our break, and then we are going to start breakout sessions in 15 minutes. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you in a bit.
Okay, I'm typing in my contact information there if people want to follow up.
Oh, absolutely.
See you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was fantastic.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.